name is Brittany Goodman, and we do not believe that the future ought to simply befall us, so that our lives should only ever be a string of random events entirely beyond our control. On the contrary, we conduct our lives in ways that are valuable to us and that protect our descendants against the hurtful vagaries of fate as far as possible, and we attach varying degrees of responsibility to those ventures. It is because we agree with Timothy F. Murphy, we affirm the resolve parents should have the right to genetically enhance their children using nanotechnology. I would like to first tell you some definitions. So the first definition I would like to talk about is Merriam-Webster's define genetic engineering, also known as genetic modification, as the group of applied techniques of genetics and biotechnology used to cut up and join together genetic material, and especially DNA, from one or more species of organism to introduce the result into an organism in order to change one or more of its characteristics. Definition 2 from the Free Dictionary defines a parent as a lawful natural mother or father of the child, which can be extended to an adoptive parent. Definition 3 is rights, as defined in the Free Dictionary, are an entitlement to something, to concepts like justice and due process, or to ownership of property or some interest in the property, real or personal. These rights include various freedoms, protections against interference with enjoyment of life and property, civil rights enjoyed by citizens such as voting and access to the course of natural rights, accepted by civilized societies, human rights, and to protect people throughout the world from terror, torture, barbaric practices, deprivation of civil rights, and profit from their labor. And this also includes the American Constitution and guarantees the rights and freedoms of speech, press, religion, assembly, and petition. Definition 4 is CRISPR. It's defined by Merriam-Webster as a segment of genetic material found in the genomes of prokaryotes and some bacteria and archaea that consist of repeat short sequences of nucleotides interspersed in regular intervals between unique sequences of nucleotides derived from the DNA of pathogens such as viruses, which have previously infected the bacteria, and functions to protect the bacteria against the future infections by the same pathogens. And now we move on to our observations, which is there are still questions about whether or not genetic modification is ethical. It's an ongoing argument. However, it's one that both sides have. And there are claims being made by Chinese scientists by the name of Jin says that he has successfully edited the genome of two human twin girls. However, he is under investigation. So that moves on to our first contention, which is parental autonomy has the right to be has already been established and it should be protected by law. First, the pro endorses the parents' right to engage in gene modification of their child or children to begin with. I want to discuss the parental rights and autonomy. In the article, Would You Like Blue Eyes with That? A Fundamental Right to Genetic Modification of Embryos by Tandis Asare, there's a court case that calls attention to the rights of the parents. The 1923 court case being Mayer versus Nebraska, in which we established statutes that ban the teaching of languages and other foreign languages prior to 8th grade. There's another court case that has that realized it was a violation of the 14th Amendment to do so, which already established parental autonomy, meaning that the parents had the right to interfere in their kids' lives to be able to establish their autonomy. Contention 2 is allowing parents to have the option of gene modification to prove beneficial to the child and society. There's already been concern that parents secure the legal right to their children. This may inflame the already present qualities within society. And according to Sanyal, one response that concerns is easy that the individual, including parents, procreative liberty, egalitarian considerations, they have only their rights toward the child and not society. And which brings me to my second point, parents have a moral duty to protect their child. Having the right to genetically modify and enhance their child is a way of protecting them and releasing them from an otherwise better life. And clearly, okay, I'm done.
All right, I'm Nathan. So I'll add one more definition of that, which is nanotechnology. Nanotechnology is basically it's defined as science, engineering, and technology conducted at a nanoscale, which is about 1 to 100 nanometers. Okay, just for perspective, there's 100,000 nanometers just in the width of a piece of newspaper. So obviously this is very small manipulation of individual atoms and molecules. So I'm just going to jump right into my first point, and it's from an article by The Economist, a British magazine. They also clearly point that the topic is one of moral significance. And when they talk about the CRISPR technology, which was brought up, they say that the changes that are made would pass from one generation to the next in perpetuity. Okay, this is a huge point, and we stand against the fact that parents should. So we say that parents should not have the right to genetically modify their children because these changes affect every generation following the generation that was affected. So this is something that must be taken into consideration, and I believe it's an ethical boundary that should not be crossed. From a Christian or religious perspective, when we're living in an age that's going to define its own moral limits, if there's no moral absolutes and there's no policy that stands for any length of time over this claim that technology is just inevitable, and that the benefits of technology will just always outweigh the dangers. This should alert us to the fact that this kind of worldview has absolutely no brakes on technology. So where are we going to draw a line and say, okay, there has to be stops to this technology? Even famed scientists in the world right now are crying for a stop. Our own National Institute of Health, Dr. Francis Collins, he's the head of the National Institute of Health, he says that this is a boundary that no responsible scientist should ever cross. Also quoting from The Economist, if the new technology can be shown safe in humans, mechanisms will also be needed to grapple with consent inequality. My question is, how can this technology be demonstrated if it's safe or not? Like, if effects don't show up for generations afterwards, how can we ever prove that this technology can be safe? We live in an age that really cannot say no to new technology, no matter its inherent risks and dangers. My third point looks at this kind of dilemma of designer babies. If you look at the Aldous Huxley's famous book, A Brave New World, he talks about all these different classes in a utopian society. And it's a satirical look, but it's really what we're actually looking at in our own world today with this genetic modifications. And in his book, they actually digress into just basically a new revival of the Dark Ages. Companies like Google and Amazon have even banned advertisements of genetic modifications in many countries because it's such a controversial topic that splits opinions. My third point is from an article by Hank Greeley, and from an article from an independent online magazine. And basically he says that this is very risky, the technology is not there yet, and human editing is actually unlikely to happen soon because it's important safety risks and also no significant benefits. He states, a technology that works 95% of the time, but then proceeds like disabled or dying infants only 5% of the time, that would still be a disaster. Also, according to the University of Missouri Health School of Medicine, changing reproductive cells may cause events not seen until years later. This is something that I hit already. Undesirable effects may have already been passed on to the patient's children. So just like you said from China, these effects won't be known in their own lifetime, and that's a problem. Also in Ronald M. Green's book titled Babies by Design, The Ethics of Choice, he looks at some of the morals and ethics surrounding genetically modifying children from a Christian worldview. And so he talks about also this idea of playing God. He says, gene manipulations represent human pride and arrogance at its worst, threaten to put human beings in direct opposition of God's will, and risking the gravest consequences for individuals and society. I'd also like to point out that this kind of argument of designer babies, the families that can afford these types of modifications will be very few. The procedure is very expensive. We have no idea the effects, as I stated already, and this will ultimately result in segregation between the superior modified humans and the inferior ones. So the purpose may be noble to eradicate genetic diseases, but really in the wrong hands, this knowledge could be devastating. So in conclusion, we stand against the fact.
You have a crossfire. 2 minutes.
First, I would like to point out the idea of playing God. First, we need to establish what exactly is God in this situation. Do we have proof that he is for or against this resolution? How do we establish what exactly is a God, and how does it work within How does it work within the realm of genetic modification?
Yeah, so, I mean, we're not arguing if there is a God, but we're saying that parents are taking on this role of God and saying that not only is my child going to be genetically modified, but every generation following will permanently be changed. And that is an ethical issue that we believe should not be crossed. So it doesn't really matter, is there a God, is there not a God? What I'm saying is that this is putting ourselves in a position that we should not have.
So when we put ourselves in a position that we should not have, we still need to establish exactly what is God. Because when you say you're playing God, it means you're taking on the characteristics of a God. It means you're taking on the power of a God. What exactly does that mean?
It means that we're putting ourselves in a position that and making choices for human beings that have no say in the matter.
So do we not do that at the very idea when gestation begins, when we decide to have a child and we're not determining their future?
We're creating their future, but we're not determining anything by giving birth to them.
Are you sure about that?
Yes, once you have a baby in your womb, you can't really do anything about it. You're not changing their gender. You're just giving birth to what's already inside of you.
But when you give birth, you still, just think of it this way, when you have like a socioeconomic situation, such as you have poor parents who have a child, do you not have that child determined to be poor whenever you bring them into the world? That means you literally make that child
but
poor.
as they're growing up, they might have certain setbacks, but that is not genetically modifying themselves to the point that they have no opportunity to even change anything about it.
Okay. When it goes to that, you're still...
I'm first.
No.
Making sure everyone's ready.
Yeah.
Okay, yes. All right, so I would like to first address that my opponent has taken a Christian standpoint. However, Christianity as a whole has been a cause of many problems throughout history, including several of the holy wars, in fact, all of the holy wars, because they believed that they were right and could not be wrong. And there is also no proof of a God existing, so how can one play God when a God does not exist? So, and also most of their arguments seem to be based on the fear of the unknown, which is something which science combats. Science draws its roots from Latin, which sciens scientis, which means knowing. And it's basically trying to find out what's going on. So instead of fearing the unknown, we can address it and move on. UNICEF estimates that about, on average, 353,000 babies are born every day. That equates to about 128 million babies per year. And 6% of those babies per year are born with genetic disorders. These genetic disorders can involve problems with the immune system. And genetic modification can actually help with problems with the immune system. So according to Efficient Genetic Modification of Immune Cells, written by Cornette and others, they also succeeded in using the method to repair a mutation in the FOXP3 gene that causes severe autoimmune diseases in mice. Autoimmune diseases specifically are something that's rampant in humanity right now. HIV/AIDS, it's a huge problem. In the gay community, in every community, there's no cure. But this science has found cures, or rather not cures, but preventions for it. So instead of a child having to be born with AIDS from parents who made poor choices or were born with it themselves, they can now have their genes edited to where they don't actually have that disease in their system. And we would also like to make the point that genetic modification does not impede on moral agency, which is an important association. Basically, according to Selecting Children, the Ethics of Reproductive Engineering, in particular, it would rule as impermissible the deliberate creation of beings without moral agency that could have moral agency. These children, their capacity to choose what is right and what is wrong for them is not impeded by these modifications. It's not changing their mind, it's changing their bodies. It's giving them a better chance at life in order to actually do something with their lives instead of just keel over and die. And then to address the idea that perhaps there is no current testing on humans fully. Like, certainly there was the case in China where the scientist was experimenting on babies, and there have been experiments in the past on people, but nothing is official. Results remain to be seen. But what is important is that we do get testing out there. We need to formalize this. We need to make sure that testing is safe, and if we don't do that, it's just going to end up like how abortions were back in the old days, when you would just go into a back alley and get just a horrible abortion that would be life-threatening. So parents are going to find ways, especially if the rich parents. So overall, we need to give parents the rights to decide for their children. I can cede the rest of my time.
Thank you for your information and points given. I do respect your opinion, but again, as a group, we do negate that parents should not have the right to genetically modify their children using nanotechnology. I wanted to reiterate some points that Nathan, our first speaker, spoke about previously. I also wanted to bring into context some new points. There's no way that parents can responsibly handle the amount of danger involved in this technology that has little to no research component. I wanted to bring into account a man who I think everyone knows very well. He was born on January 8, 1942, by the name of Stephen Hawking. He was a British scientist, professor, and author who performed groundbreaking work in physics, cosmology, and whose books helped to make science accessible to everyone. At the age of 21, Hawking was diagnosed with amyotrophic sclerosis, also known as ALS. ALS, in a very simple sense, is when the nerves that control the muscles shut down. Hawking kept his disease hidden for a long time, thinking that, quote, people would look at him as less of or not perfect. I wanted to bring into account a direct quote from Hawking again. Before my condition was diagnosed, I had been very bored with life. There had not seemed to be anything worth doing, and I poured myself into my work because even though I was dying, I had so much to live for. An estimated 5 to 10% of ALS is caused by mutation in one of the several genes. With that being said, if Hawking's mother would have known that Stephen would be born with ALS mutation and altered him inside the womb, would we have experienced the extravagant work that Hawking's provided for us? I am no way, shape, or form wishing disease on anyone. But as Nathan spoke about before, should we play God, or does God actually have a plan for people? Furthermore, I wanted to speak on behalf of personal experience. Genetic screening is offered to all pregnant women and is usually discussed during the first prenatal visit. A Dr. Andrea Greiner, a maternal and fetal medicine specialist at the University of Iowa Hospitals and Clinics, states that, quote, it's optional but not required. Most women get this test done for things to test for Down syndrome and see if it will affect the baby when it's born. I am currently 39 weeks pregnant, only 6 days before I get to meet my beautiful daughter Mia, and I chose not to get any genetic testing done. I believe that when ethics are involved, Mia will be just as bright, just as able, and just as important as someone who was genetically modified as the perfect human. But what is the perfect human? Dr. Greiner also states that another disadvantage that genetic screenings can give false positive results, meaning they can be wrong and lead to expectant parents to believe their unborn babies might have a genetic abnormality when they actually do not. This takes me back to trying to grasp why parents should not have the right to genetically modify and use of nanotechnology. Again, as stated before, genetically modifying humans will only increase the disparity between the various social classes. This will ultimately result in more segregation between superior modified humans and the pure but inferior ones. We all know as 21st century humans, the amount of segregation still present in America today between races, genders, and ultimately people of wealth and people in low income or poor areas. Ethically speaking, you are all saying that if genetic modification were to be allowed, you would be okay with the continuation of segregation and ultimately superior person versus a diverse nation, which I think we all Americans want. If parents are able to genetically modify their children, only the top 1% would have easy access to it. Genetic modification can cost up to $100,000. The average annual income of the top 1% of the population is $717,000. compared to the income of the rest of the population, which is around $51,000. So on average, that's about half of their yearly income. The 1% are worth $8.4 million and 70 times more worth than the lower class. These people include doctors, lawyers, and people like politicians. Your group as a whole is saying that if you're allowed nanotechnology to be accessed, you'd be okay with only the wealthy 1% being able to have this easy access. It all ties back to moral and ethical issues. I also wanted to bring up something that you stated, nothing is official. How do we ensure that testing is safe if we don't see it for decades in advance? If I were to genetically modify my baby, we would not have proof of if it worked or if it was actually more harmful until I, herself, and her granddaughter or grandson were deceased. We have to accept others as they are. If you could predict gay by a gene pool, would you modify that? Thank you.
Well, to address, you mentioned that you were 36 weeks pregnant, correct?
39 weeks.
39
6
weeks,
days.
sorry.
Yes.
Well, you mentioned that you chose not to have the genetic screening done,
I
correct?
sure did.
You did? Well, that was your choice, correct? That was your right as the parent, right?
Absolutely. My baby is not born. As of right now, I do have a say in the benefit of my baby, but I'm not using science or medicine to alter my baby. I believe that when she comes out, whether she has Down syndrome, ALS, MS, multiple sclerosis, etc., she is going to be just as able and just as brilliant as any other person sitting in this room.
And not to deny that, that is completely correct. However, it is still the parent's choice whether or not, to see what's best for their child.
Let me ask you a simple question. I am a 23, almost 24-year-old college student paying for school. I have bills. I'm definitely not in the 1%, nor is my family. If I got some testing done and found out that my baby had Down syndrome or my baby had ALS or etc., and I wasn't able to pay for my baby to be genetically modified, do you think that that is okay? That lawyer that just won a case against the man who killed someone is able to genetically modify their child?
I do not think that that is okay. However, I do think that
It's okay. I wanted to bring up another point, actually. The first speaker, if we are allowed to talk about what the first speaker said, she talked a lot about the Bible and how we know God is real. There is a direct quote, and I believe belief is a very strong thing. You guys are saying that if the parent believes that they should genetically modify their child, they should be able to. Belief means an acceptance that a statement is true or that something exists. I believe there's a God. I believe that God made everyone equal.
In presenting our argument in favor of the resolve that parents should have the right to genetically enhance their children, we have brought to the table key elements that have validated the affirmative. We started out by saying autonomy has already been established in our country and it should be protected by law. Whether it was limitations on home teaching or limitations on school attendance, it is the parent's right to decide what dictates their child's life. Is this not included by genetically enhancing their children? We also stated that this is a small change in DNA by the negative. If it is such a small change in DNA, how is it going to be prevalent later down the line in these generations if it's such a small impact of the DNA? Changes made will be lasting generations, as you said, but is this not already the case with non-genetically modified children? Your DNA is going to pass on to generations after generations after generations. You also said that we have to stop technology. Technology, it can't be stopped. And if we did stop technology, there'd be a lot of advantages that we have today that we wouldn't have, whether it be increase in medical technology, such as heart transplants, brain transplants. All that wouldn't exist if we decided we'd gone far enough in technology. Also, you said that technology is not ready. We're not disagreeing with that. I by far agree that there's lots of steps that need to be taken, but it does not necessarily mean that it's out of the question. We're not arguing regulations or the fact that we should or can't do this. We're arguing that it's the parents' right. Babies by design and playing God, church should never have an influence in government. Not that you're saying God is a Christian belief or it is another belief, but the idea that God has an influence on these arguments, it really shouldn't be the case because, as Austin said in the past, it has not led to very appropriate things, such as the Holy Wars. Going back to Austin, he's highlighted that past God influence is, he also stated that 6% of babies are born with genetic disorders already. If we implement nanotechnology and it reduces this percentage of debilitated children, is it not worth it? Is no risk, or is no opportunity for these children not worth the risk of an opportunity? With the possibility of eradicating HIV and AIDS, as Austin stated, we can eliminate a present segregation that we see now between medically debilitated children and normal children. We will never be able to eradicate segregation. It is part of human nature to hate other people for who they are because they're not like them. But there's a present segregation between these children who are healthy and who have medical disabilities that we can solve now through nanotechnology with eradicating these debilitating diseases. And also, that's not to say that we have influenced the entirety of these children's lives. They still have the ability to make their own decisions. We can choose how they're going to be through nanotechnology to benefit them later on in their life, but they can still make their own decisions. We don't dictate what they do with their life. We give them a better opportunity to attack what they want to do in their life. Also going to your quote on Stephen Hawking saying that if we had already implemented nanotechnology to where we could remove his disability, it sounds almost like you're suggesting that keeping these disabilities of people benefits us at their suffering. I'm pretty sure Stephen Hawking would have much rather preferred a healthy lifestyle because he was an incredible person, but it did debilitate him quite seriously. And you've also been making generalizations against us that we are supporting segregation.
Stop.
Thank you. Coming back to my main thesis, we negate that the parents should have rights to genetically modify the children using nanotechnology because there is still very little research done about it. And mother's womb is known to be the safest place, the most peaceful place. Even when the chicken lays egg, the chicken sits on it to make it warm. And all this process is taken outside the mother's womb. This is, as my partner said, this is very risky, and all the nanotechnology is passed down to the generations. And how do you know that it's affecting? Because this results and this everything will not show for generations. And when you talked about technology, I actually agree with you that yeah, technology cannot be stopped, but technology also can be used to find the embryos. So in the early stage, you can find the good embryos and the disorder embryos. If you have technology to locate the disorder embryos, you can just take out the disorder embryos and you can put in and just work with the good embryos. And genetically engineering is against nature. It's illegal to tinker with the genetic code. Humans should stop pretending like God and just be human, because we are different. Our hair is different, our skin is different, our color is different, and it's okay to talk about that we are different and acknowledge why we are different. Instead of pretending that nobody's different, then still secretly thinking that we are different. We might just finally be on the same page and can be less different. There's nowhere that parents should go to and go through this danger at their child. Scientists have proven that there are no significant benefits, yet many safety risks associated with nanotechnology. And he also talked about yeah, it's as my partner earlier talked about, that it's a very expensive process. Yeah, it's an expensive process. So you want your baby to genetically modify your baby even before it's born. That baby is getting an unfair advantage over the whole society. It can have intelligence, it can be physically strong, and that's the reason why the richer will get more richer and poor will get more poor because of this unfair advantage.
We're gonna cross by 3 minutes.
Okay, first,
I have a question. So I think that we're both in agreement that diseases are bad, and we hate diseases just as much as y'all do. But my question is kind of relating to where are the limits? How do we define what parents are going to do? You know, if they have the right to genetically modify their babies, who's stopping them from then going past diseases and then saying, oh well, I want this big, I want just kind of like a toss-up. So we both hate diseases, but where's the limit? Where's the line for parents?
Well, that's not what we're arguing here. We're arguing, do the parents have the right? Regulations are another subject that's actually being debated in other rooms. So it's kind of irrelevant to our conclusion what the regulations are on what people can do.
Okay, but how do you define, when you say children are given a better opportunity if they do not have a disease, how do you define that? What is a better opportunity?
That is up for the parents to decide for their children. They raise them how they see fit, and so they decide what is a better life for them, and then the child gets to decide what is their best life for them.
Why should parents have that ability?
okay.
Because they give birth to that child.
Do I get to choose the college my daughter goes to? Do I get to choose who she marries? Do
Certainly
I get to choose
not.
Okay, so you
anything
said
that
you don't
are-
get to choose any of those things. Why do you think we should have to sit here and listen to you say you're playing God and things like that? God is a belief, and a belief is a choice. And a choice not everybody chooses to believe in. So when you say, I don't get to choose this, why do you think God gets to choose for us what we do?
Okay, so I have a question that still hasn't been answered by our team. You guys talk about the choice, and this is a right that we're trying to just argue out. Okay. Now, the choice is already taken away from most of the population. And most of the population, it's not most of the rich people who have this problem that they need to genetically modify. So if that choice is already taken away, why should you give that right, that perfect right that they need, when it's already taken away from the majority of the population? Now
That was a matter that I was going to address, actually. We would like to, the affirmative side, believe that the cost for genetic modification will go down as the practice is more used and tempered to fit the needs of the population.
is that proven by statistics, or
It
is
is
that a
not, but it
belief
is
out of you?
proven by any other kind of medicine.
Can
The
you-
cost for medicine has gone
Can
down.
you give me an
now, if the
example?
price does
I
go
cannot.
down,
I
Can
am
you give
almost
me an
positive.
example of prices going up for medicine?
Yeah.
Please give some.
That like
Okay, for example, an EpiPen. Do you know how much it is to get an
Very
EpiPen
much,
for
a
a
lot.
young child who's allergic to bees? It has only gone up, percentage-wise. Has
also
only gone
the
up.
procedure may only actually cost a specific amount, but the amount that people will charge to give that procedure will be raised as
It's all about money in
Yeah.
America. That is what it is about. At the end of the day, doctors don't care about well-being. They care
That's
about
true.
their paychecks.
That's true.
Do what?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
Sorry in advance, y'all. Okay, so overall, I believe that our team has won because we have gone over and seen only improvements for the children. Currently, as I said before, 6% of the worldwide children born every year are born with genetic disorders, and these are not completely preventable, but a decent amount of them are preventable by genetic modification. And our opponents have brought up very religious views and relied on arguments that can't be based in fact, but are based in opinion. As stated earlier, genetic modification does not impede on moral agency because it does not change how the child thinks. They are still free to go about how they want to live their lives as soon as they move out of their parents' home and become legal adults themselves. The parents have the right to raise their children how they wish, according to Brittany. And then they get to move out and choose for themselves, and then they get to have children and choose how to raise those children. That's how this life works. We can't just base preventing science from advancing on the fact that, oh no, it's untested. That's why we test things. We have to get it out there. The more it's tested, the more the price will go down. At least in my personal opinion, I guess that just doesn't matter. But, can I redact that? Overall, our side won, and the improvements to humanity that genetic modification provides outweigh the costs and the drawbacks of genetic modification. Parents should have the right to genetically modify their children. Amen.
But accept God.
So, me and my team, we still negate that parents should have the right to genetically modify their children using nanotechnology. With this happening, there's no direct way that parents will be able to handle the danger that could possibly come from genetically modifying their children, as well as instead of genetically modifying your child, that choice is already taken away from half the population, which I stated before. And if we're not putting personal opinion into it, which I just said you're using personal opinion, if we're not using personal opinion in it, then that opinion that the cost will go down once we begin to test it more should be scratched out, because that's an opinion. People, ethically, it's wrong because you're playing God. And yes, it is a choice to believe in God, this, that, and the third. However, it also should be taken into consideration that maybe one day that child might look back and possibly see that they were genetically modified and think maybe what would have happened if I wasn't. Was it really that bad? Was whatever I had really that bad that you had to change me to be this perfect person? Did you, as a parent, did you really believe that choice was the best choice for me as a child? Because at the end of the day, it is all about choice. But you do have to think about it. It's not just your choice that matters at that point, because you are having a child. You are bringing that child into this world. However, you do have to remember that at the end of the day, your choices do affect that child in the end. And when does it stop? When does it begin to be too much of a choice that you have to genetically modify your child that, oh, well, this was too bad for them? What if that's something they would have wanted? Does their choice not come into play as well? As well as that, it's very costly. It is, it's very costly. It brings in too many problems that haven't necessarily even been taken, haven't been looked at, not only in the scientific world, but also in the real world. It brings in more segregation that we already don't need as it is, and that's a problem in itself. And then on top of that, my last closing statements have to be, if this begins to take effect, and if it's really that good of an idea that they should have the right to, then it should be that everybody should have the right to, not just a certain amount of people, or not just people that should afford it. It also should be that genetically modified children should be able to not only save them from diseases, but help in the end. And then the problem here lies that it's not effective for all, and it's not in any way, shape, or form morally correct that we should do that.
Figured.
Foster was great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you guys.
Yeah, that was
I
fun.
roast you because I love you. Also, you look like Donald Trump Jr. now. I'm so sorry.
You
I
guys,
took off the wig and I was like, oh, that's not better.
I just started like screaming over there.
this one?
No, this Emily and Arian.